Exposure is one of the most misunderstood areas of photography, and it's not just that it's hard to learn, it's also extremely important to how your photos end up looking. It's literally how much light you're putting in the camera, and that's kind of the whole idea with photography, right? So let's unpack exposure, let's learn how to avoid the most common mistakes, and at the end, I'll share the strategy that I use to not need to worry about it 99% of the time. For ages, I didn't properly understand how to expose my photos, and it really held me back. It prevented me from being able to express myself artistically the way that I wanted to. And, it made my photos bad because I used the wrong settings. And when exposure and light metering finally clicked for me, I felt like I had taken the camera version of the limitless pill. It's like when you drive manual without thinking about the gears for the first time. Today, with any luck, I'm going to unlock that for you so that you can have access to what might just be the most important and powerful creative tool that photographers have. And also, so that your photos don't get ruined by using the wrong settings. But before we can understand how much light to give the camera, first we need to understand how to measure the light in the first place, because that's one of the first places that a lot of photographers make a really common mistake. Most cameras have a light meter. If it's quite an old camera like this one, it could be a needle that moves up and down, or if it's a medium old camera like this one, it might be these little bars that go left or right. You can also get light meters that don't come with the rest of the camera attached like this one, which we'll come back to later because it's got a very cool trick up its sleeve. Now, if you shoot in fully manual mode, your camera will just show you the light reading. But if you're in aperture priority, shutter priority, P, auto, or any of the other modes that let the camera make any decisions, it's making those decisions based on the reading from the light meter. So what does it do? If you look at the meter on this camera, it's showing us how bright the light is, right? If the bars are at the left side, where the minus is, that means it's underexposed or too dark. If the bars are at the right side, where the plus is, you guessed it, that means it's overexposed or there's too much light. And if the bar is in the middle, that means it's correctly exposed. Or does it? See, I'm pointing this camera at a white paper backdrop. The camera doesn't know what color the backdrop is, right? In fact, the camera has no idea what it's looking at all. All the light meter is doing is looking at how bright it is. Do you see the problem yet? This white paper backdrop should obviously be brighter than this photo book, which is black. A really great way to visualize this is this chart. This paper should be about as bright as this box at the end here, marked zone 10, or it won't look white. And the book should be all the way down the other end, like a 0 or a 1. This chart is the zone system, and it was originally thunk up by Ansel Adams, who, aside from having a legendary beard and hat game, was a pretty good landscape photographer. This will be your first aha moment. All the light meter is doing is looking out the lens and telling us where on this chart the image is. The light meter wants what it sees to be zone 5, also known as middle gray. So when the bar is in the middle, it means that the camera is averaging out all of the brightnesses in the photo and deciding that the average brightness is here. If I put this camera on auto and I take a photo of the white paper backdrop, it comes out bang in the middle, and the same thing happens with the book. The light meter was in the middle, showing us a correct exposure, but these shots are obviously not right, especially once you see the correct versions. But how do we make sure our exposure is actually correct then? Well, this handy dandy chart isn't just random shades of gray. Each one of these zones is one stop of light. That means that each time you go this way, you're doubling the brightness. And you guessed it, each time you go this way, you're halving the brightness. Now, while you can definitely just whack your camera on auto and let it decide most of the time, some of the time, you do need to put your brain in the process as well. For example, let's say you're taking photos in the snow. A snowy street is way brighter than a regular street, and so your camera will probably get confused just the same as it did with the white backdrop. Another situation is shooting at night. Nighttime is dark, and we usually want it to look dark, but your camera thinks it needs to be here in zone 5. So we need to deliberately underexpose compared to what the light meter says. A big part of your job as the artist or professional or the joker who got let in with a camera is to decide consciously how bright you want the scene to be. If you're shooting manual, you'll do this by using the exposure triangle, which we'll get back to, and if you're in an auto or priority mode, you can do this with exposure compensation. That's this button, and it lets you tell the camera to over or underexpose by a certain amount, which is conveniently measured in stops. How handy is that? Now, when we're deciding on which settings to use to control our exposure is where it gets tricky. I bet you've been told that you need to learn the exposure triangle and then been presented with this monstrosity. Seriously, how is anybody supposed to look at that and understand what's going on? It's not intuitive, and yeah, I do think I have a better way, actually. That's where this little handheld light meter comes in. It has a really clever trick up its sleeve that makes understanding exposure so much easier. First, I'm going to expose you for not having a portfolio website yet. How many times am I going to need to tell you about our video sponsor, Framer? That's right, Framer is an all-in-one online tool for creating and publishing websites, and it's so easy that even What? Even easier? Yes, not joking, Framer have teamed up with Work Louder and released this absolutely insane contraption, the Framer Creator Micro. What does it do? It's essentially a keyboard on steroids, and it's clever enough to figure out what program you're using and gives you access to the controls literally at your fingertips. It's got a turny roundy knob, a wiggly knob, and it comes with loads of spare keycaps with icons from Framer so that you can customize it to do exactly the things you'd like it to do. Oh, and it also lights up. Now, at first I thought I've actually got quite a few buttons already, you know, these ones, but now that I've been using this thing for a while, I'm not giving it back, Framer. Having a physical controller for the creative stuff I do on a screen helps me get into flow easier. It makes it feel more like play, and yeah, it's faster. Here's the kicker. This thing doesn't just work for Framer. You can make your own presets that do all sorts of stuff, and there's even pre-made ones for the most common software. I've been using this to fly around Lightroom at light speed, as well as in DaVinci Resolve. Having a knob to move the playhead, priceless. Do you know what else is priceless? Showcasing your art the way that you want to on a website that you control. So click the link in the video description to get started with Framer today and use the code HunterCreates for an upgrade on the house. I've also linked the Framer Creator Micro down below so that you can grab one while they're still available. Thank you to Framer and to you for supporting what I do. The evil exposure triangle is the least useful way to learn about cameras. It's art. Why does this feel like physics class? But you say, but Hunter, you need to understand the exposure triangle to know which settings to use. Otherwise, you can measure all the light you like and you still won't know how to use that information. Well, yeah, but also, no. First of all, sure, you can just use your camera in one of the auto modes like P or A or aperture priority. Look at the light meter, decide that you'd like it to be brighter than a zone 5, perhaps a zone 7, and then just set your exposure compensation to +2. But fine, I said that I had a better way to teach this, so here you go. The problem I have with the exposure triangle is that you're trying to, all at once, learn about 3 different variables that affect 6 different variables, and that's too many things affecting other things. And that's not how we learned it before digital. Not all at once, anyway. See, this digital camera can change its ISO on a whim with this dial. It can go all over the place, and to be quite honest, it doesn't really matter where it is so long as it's not a 6-digit number. But film is different. Each different flavor of film has a set ISO. This is Ilford HP5 and it's ISO 400. This is Portra 160 and it's ISO 160. If we get rid of that side of the triangle, well, we get an exposure L, which isn't really, that's besides the point. Let me show you. Let's pretend for a moment that we're using film. Say this roll of HP5 from before, we know it's ISO 400 and it will be for every photo we take that day. So we can basically just lock our ISO in and forget about changing it. Now we're just left with shutter speed and aperture. This light meter shows us how bright it is that way. Step 1 is to use the inner dial to lock in our film's ISO. So 400. Now we can get the correct settings to use by turning this dial to line up the thingy with the needle. It's like lining up the sights on a gun. It's really easy. Once we've done this, you'll notice this inner ring shows us f-stops, that is aperture settings, and this outer ring shows us shutter speeds. These are all in 1-stop increments. On the aperture dial, you can see that each time we go this way, we're getting 1 stop brighter. On the shutter speed dial, we're getting a stop darker. 1/1000th of a second is half as bright as 1/500th, and f2 is twice as bright, or 1 stop brighter, than f2.8. You still with me? Every single different combination we have to pick from here lets the same amount of light into the camera. f11 at a 30th of a second is exactly the same amount of light as f2 at a 1000th of a second. Being able to visually see the settings laid out like this and being able to physically move them around is so much better than the triangle, right? Especially since once we know how much light there is, we just need to decide what we want to compromise. Would we prefer a faster shutter speed or more depth of field? But Hunter, how do I know which settings to pick? There are so many different options. That's right, and I'm glad you asked because this is the part of the video that I get slightly more pretentious. How much motion blur is okay is up to you. How much stuff you want to have in focus versus out of focus is up to you. That's where the calculator has to go away and the creative juice machine has to switch on. But it's not just that you're choosing from these options. Remember, this wants to make everything middle gray. It's up to you to decide, no, I'd actually like it brighter or darker than that. For example, some photographers really like to take dark, moody, spooky photos, and so they're always underexposing them. Some photographers like to shoot images that feel really open and airy and bright, and so they're often overexposed compared to what the light meter says. The only correct exposure is the one that you had in your head before you took the photo. And yeah, sure, you can do this in Photoshop or whatever, but I didn't sign up to be a photographer to sit behind a desk more, and I don't think you did either. It's not always about doing the most perfectly optimized thing, it's about experimenting and having fun and seeing what happens. Speaking of perfectly optimized, let's get back to me for a second. At the start of the video, I said that I would share the technique that I use 99% of the time. It's auto ISO. I use full manual mode with auto ISO switched on, like almost all of the time. The reason that this works so well for me is that I tend to shoot quite quickly and the lighting I'm in changes really fast. Instead of having to do f-stop algebra in my head constantly, I just control the settings that matter the most to me. Shutter speed lets me control motion blur, and aperture lets me control depth of field, that's how much stuff is in focus, and I let the camera decide on the ISO. I do this for two reasons. Number one is that most of the time I'd probably end up choosing the same ISO as the camera anyway, since I'm always more willing to compromise that than any other setting. And even if the camera and I do disagree, I can still use exposure compensation. Number two is that I don't really care about ISO. Maybe 10 years ago it made a big difference, but on pretty much any newish full frame camera, you can basically set the ISO to any number under 1 billion and it won't be that noisy. And then you say, what? That's crazy. You must be one of those influencers with a camera that costs more than my house. No, I use a Nikon D750 from like 12 years ago at like ISO 12,800 all the time. It's fine. Don't trust me? Watch this video next where I'll explain why you really don't need to worry about ISO as much as you think you do. Stay hydrated and create art.